This is a video that is meant to quickly introduce the upcoming SOP project. This project is going to be carrying us through the midpoint of the semester, a little bit past the midpoint actually, and I will try to keep this video short. The project is introduced on Canvas through several different mediums, so let's just, get going with it. Hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, you will have some sense of the topic that you will choose for this project. So there are 3 different assignments to this. It all surrounds a standard operating procedure, which is essentially a set of instructions. But before we get to this standard operating procedure, I want you to write a proposal to some audience asking permission to implement that standard operating procedure. So if you were to write a standard operating procedure on how to collect samples or analyze samples or take inventory within a lab or use some piece of equipment within a lab, the proposal would be written to a lab manager, preferably a real existing one on campus. Now, you do not actually have to send the proposal. I should be clear about that. I want you to write it with a firm, real, existing audience in mind. Whether or not you send the proposal to that person is entirely up to you. I would definitely say a majority of students do not send the proposal, but some do. Occasionally, students will send these proposals out, and they will end up getting an SOP implemented somewhere on campus. We should also acknowledge it doesn't have to involve anything to do with campus or directly with science. Students will write standard operating procedures on, say, for instance, fixing a bicycle or maintaining a firearm, or doing some sort of repair operation on a car, and those proposals for those assignments will be written to a bicycle shop or an auto supply store. The proposal does need to target a real audience. That is a component of the assignment that is absolutely necessary. Now, after you write the proposal, then you're going to write the standard operating procedure. That's the set of instructions, or in some cases we could call it a field guide or an instructional article, and then you are going to test it. You're going to have some other person walk through the instructions that you have written and try to follow them, and you will assess how useful they are. Based on that, you are going to write an IMRAD style report on the usability test, or on the user testing. So IMRAD is the same style that Haynes et al. Were using in that surgical safety checklist article. We will talk more about it. There's a lot to it that has not been covered yet. For right now, and again, just to be clear, I'm on week 3 of our Canvas page. I want to go down here and I want to click on the assignment sheet. This is obviously on Canvas for you to read. I am not going to read through it verbatim in this video, but I want to point out an important point or two. When we get to choosing a topic, it needs to be something you can actually do. Sometimes students will pick something that is well beyond their skill level or that they do not have the equipment to do. For example, I have had students propose something like open heart surgery or repairing a jet engine, and both of the students that propose those things, they do picture open heart surgery or repairing jet engines as something in their future, but it does not fit the goals of the assignment. The assignment needs to be something that you can actually do. Likewise, you need to have somebody else do it. If this project is going to work as intended and you're going to fulfill all of the assignments, it has to be something that you can have another person, at least one, hopefully more than one, walk through the instructions and while you observe them and see how effective your instructions are at teaching what you intend them to teach. There might be some exceptions to this. Occasionally students will want to do something that involves lab work and they maybe don't have all of the equipment necessary to pull it off, or some particular part of the procedure is going to cost hundreds of dollars. In those cases, I will work with the student and I will say something like, okay, test part of the SOP, but don't necessarily feel like you need to test all of it. There's also a thing called a mock-up. Usually we don't have to resort to these sort of workarounds, but occasionally a student picks something that really is a good topic, and it's just that the student doesn't have the full ability to test that. If that's the case, we can find some sort of workaround for the testing. It needs to have, it being the topic of the SOP, needs to have a well-defined set of boundaries. So let me give an example that is listed right here. I had a student who wanted to write an SOP on how to play basketball, and while I like basketball and I think it's kind of a fun topic, it's just way too broad. I mean, there's a million different ways of playing basketball and a lot of different strategies involved, different positions. It's just too nebulous. So after working with the student for a little while, we came up with the idea that he would write an SOP on how to run a basketball camp. A lot of times youth basketball camps are run by coaches who are new to coaching, and we came up with sort of a coach's guide for novice coaches on how to run a basketball camp, how to get the students in certain drills, how to teach certain concepts, and how to run the day-to-day operations of that camp. And that worked out well. I've got a little bit of a formatting error. This list of topics that worked well in the past should be on the next page. Here's the next page. So you can read through this list yourself. I start off with a lot of stuff involving lab work, but it doesn't all have to be lab work. We could do an SOP on inspecting a bus, or on tuning skis, or cleaning a French horn, and so forth. I'm going to scroll down here to the very last one, cooking delicious lasagna. This was a student who was having a great deal of trouble with this. She did not work in a lab. She did not know how to repair things. And after talking to the student, we did discover the student really liked to cook. And recipes are SOPs of a sort. They are instructional articles in which a certain amount of steps are meant to be followed procedurally, and she wrote a good one on this. So the audience for the proposal was a local culinary store called Sur La Table. They do occasionally host cooking classes, and this turned out to be a good project. It turned out to be something that was totally viable. If you are struggling, you read through this list and there's nothing here that sparks anything, and you're really worried about this project, that's a reason to send me a Canvas message or an email, and we could try to come up with something. And I always find something for the students to do. Our students will always find something. So if you're drawing a blank at first, don't panic. Get hold of me. We'll try to come up with something that could potentially be useful for you to pursue for this project. Again, it's got to be something that you can do and that you can observe others doing. And I'm also going to stress once again that the proposal should be written to a real existing audience. For instance, if you're writing about how to tune skis, do not necessarily write it to just anybody who happens to be a skier. You want to write that proposal to a ski shop, like say Christie's Sports, or to the university recreation office. I can't remember exactly what the name is, but the people that rent skis. The proposal that you are writing is mostly asking for permission to implement an SOP. If we're talking about how proposals function in the science world and in the business world, often they are asking for money. And sometimes students will put in a little pitch for funding of their projects. But be aware that the proposal section of this class is meant to demonstrate those sorts of documents that get researchers funding so they can do their work in the first place. They're a crucial part of scientific discourse, and convincing an audience that you have a good idea and a good plan, that's a good skill. It's going to serve you well regardless of whether or not you think you're going into professional research. So that's where we're going next. We'll hopefully have a good experience with this project. I've had a lot of students that have really enjoyed this, and they've gotten a lot of useful stuff out of it. So if you have questions about any of this, send me an email or a Canvas message. Please get your journal synopsis finished by midnight, by Friday at midnight, and I will stay in touch.